Welcome back to Beyond the Hyphen. I'm Mark Lee, your host. Today I'm joined by Oliver Ma, a Democratic Socialist candidate for Lieutenant Governor of California. Oliver has worked across public service, civic leadership, and community advocacy, and he's now stepping into one of the most competitive political arenas and races in the country at a relatively young age. His campaign raises questions about California's future, about how representative leadership truly can be for young people and how responsibilities are evolving for a new generation in a time when political divisiveness continues to dominate the narrative. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oliver, you're a civil rights attorney. On your campaign page, it says that your everyday work encompasses fighting slumlords, fighting legal actions taken by ICE, the federal administration, so on and so forth. But before all of this and the campaign, when you think back to where you grew up, your immigrant roots, where your family came from, and what it looked like, why did you become a civil rights attorney? And how did that journey shape your desire to now run for lieutenant governor?
Yeah, so my family and I immigrated to the US when I was 7. And growing up, I grew up in Irvine, California, which was a good home for immigrants. But there was one instance where my grandma was walking just a few blocks away from my school when federal agents saw her, profiled her because she didn't speak English, and took her. And I was the one making the phone calls and filling out forms to try to help get her out. And that was a really formative experience for me. I wanted to keep fighting for my family and my community. So that's why I went to college and then went to law school afterwards.
Yeah, and when you actually get into that work, going through law school, obviously it's its own thing, but when you actually start doing that work day to day, for you representing tenants and immigrants, what were you seeing that you want others, and perhaps in particular young people, to understand that in the work that you do as they enter these fields of law, politics, or public policy?
I think obviously when we go into public policy or advocacy, what we want to do is create change. And I think it's really important to study what are the kind of changes that last, right? Getting a law passed through the legislature, that is not change that necessarily lasts because the court could strike it down, or in another election, a different party could reverse whatever law you passed, right? Just look at Obamacare, litigated twice in the Supreme Court, if not more. Every time there's a Republican in office, they try to dismantle it. And in many ways, they have succeeded now. So that kind of change doesn't last. Now, what about change through the court system, right? Whenever Roe versus Wade, that is another decision that another court, other judges can just come and reverse with a snap of the finger. The kind of change that really lasts is changing people's hearts and minds, changing how people see something. Because once you've done that, that change is pretty much permanent. And so I would advise anyone looking to go into these fields to use whatever they do in those fields as tools to change people's hearts and minds. So, for example, the law, right? What I love to do is to use my legal skills to help community movements. So when I was working in eviction defense, we would often represent people who were in a very specific circumstance. Let's say a building has had really bad conditions for a long time, or the landlord comes and raises the rent by a lot, right? A really good thing people can do to defend themselves and build power is to organize a tenants union so they can negotiate with the landlord on equal footing. Of course, when that happens, what the landlord does is they try to evict the leaders, the organizers of the tenant union. And so what I can do as an attorney is I can come and represent that leader and be a shield for the movement so they can keep on advocating and doing the real work. That's a great thing you can do as an attorney. I think in public policy, what's even more important than getting laws passed is telling stories and framing the narrative and using the platform you have to change the way people think about issues, right? Instead of, oh, what Trump is doing is, getting rid of criminals. We say, Well, actually, he's trying to tear apart families to throw people into for-profit prisons. It's a business. And just doing reframing like that and telling stories, I find, is necessary to create lasting change.
Got you, got you. Yeah, in a work, I think in your work, there's that side where, you can represent several people, you can represent unions, groups of people, but there's also those cases where you represent one family, one person at a time, right? And so in your work, Oliver, as a civil rights attorney, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're more often than not, helping one person or one family at a time, or one group of people getting through whatever they need to get through. And like you mentioned, acting as that legal shield so that they can continue to advocate. Did you ever start to feel the limits maybe of that approach, and what limits do you see surrounding just advocating through the courts and through the legal system, which to me sort of gives reason where now you're entering into that sort of policymaking side of it, right? Going into this race, lieutenant governor, and when the governor's gone, I know you mentioned in a recent post, if you were to be elected as the LG, you would be the governor, or serving the functions of the governor when he or she is gone. And so, where did you sort of realize that as an individual, you yourself, and with others, the community needs to take action sort of on both sides of the game, on the legal side, but also on the grassroots community policymaking side?
Yeah. So the work we do as civil rights attorneys is a little different than how you described it. How it typically works is we'll see the government, either state government, local government, or typically it's the federal government, do something that is illegal, that violates often the Constitution, right? So maybe they are operating a for-profit prison and not giving people access to healthcare, or maybe they are targeting people just based on their skin color, in violation of the Constitution. So when we see that, we will get groups together or individuals to challenge the government's illegal actions. We're not there to win any kind of compensation for people or groups. We're there to get a court to order the government stop with whatever they're doing. And so in that way, you can really make systemic change because you're getting a court to come and force the government to stop something. But where I really saw the flaws of the system is, well, two things. One, making change only through the law is kind of like cheating. It's taking a shortcut because you're not doing the actual hard work of changing people's hearts and minds. You're not building leaders, you're not telling stories, you're not organizing at a grassroots level. And so it's very easy for the other side to reverse whatever wins you make. And number two, in our present day and age, court orders are not what they used to be. So the very first immigration raid under Trump in the whole country was in the county where I lived, in Kern County, where they came through and they rounded up hundreds of farm workers. And so at the ACLU, my team and I, we sue, and we actually win. In April last year, we won an injunction protecting the entire Central Valley of California, about 10 million people, from further illegal immigration raids. But what was very noticeable to me was the Trump administration didn't care. For them, an order from a judge was like a sheet of paper, and they kept the raids going. And I think that really showed me that a lot of these traditional guardrails of our democracy are no longer there, right? The courts, they don't have an army. They have power because people believe they have power. And if the president of the United States doesn't believe they have power, then really they lose a lot of their power. But California can do a lot more to step up and defend the state and defend our communities. And that's why I'm running.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious too, like for young people in California, for young people, even just across the country, when we see, like you mentioned, certain people maybe not listening or not following certain court rulings or court decisions, what further actions can we take as a community, and as young people to bring that energy and to, like you said, change the hearts and minds of young people?
Yeah. There's a few things people can do. I think anything for young people, anything that puts you on the front lines is really great, because then you kind of see very viscerally the impact this system has on real people. you hear their stories, you learn about their families and their aspirations and who they are and their fears. And then you see typically the state has done something horrible to them. And I think when people see that, just even regular people who don't care about politics, when they see that, it really lights a fire under them or inside of them. And that is a really good North Star that will keep on pointing you in the right direction, is knowing how to fight for justice and having that drive to fight for justice. I think, I could tell people, hey, like get involved in this organization or, make videos on social media or whatever. But if you don't have the passion for it, doing those things is not going to make you an effective advocate. And if you do have the passion for it, then you can ignore, anything I suggest and find your own way and be very effective in that. There's so many communities. Everyone has their own communities that they have roots in, and each community requires a different kind of organizing, a different kind of advocacy. And so I think what's most important is getting that passion for change. And then everything else will come easily. It's like the old saying, right? If you want somebody to build a boat, you don't tell them that the dimensions of the boat. You don't tell them how to build a boat. All you need to do is to give them a love of the sea, and they will figure out how to build that boat.
Yeah, sort of like that saying from Aesop's fable, but I digress. You're a young person, right? In the scheme of, I think, greater politics, you're seen as a young person. You're also part of the AAPI community. That's incredibly diverse, but often, I think, seen or treated as a single political bloc, a single, demographic by many politicians and many policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
From your experience and from your vantage point, what are the issues or pressures that the AAPI communities in California are dealing with right now that you think could be ameliorated or might be overlooked or need to be taken up more by policymakers and recognized?
I think many of the core challenges are not unique to the AAPI community. I think the biggest issue facing almost all communities in the US is that we have a country that caters to corporations and special interests instead of to regular people, right? Our housing system, it is so expensive because corporate landlords can come and buy up thousands of homes. And young people and working people of all colors is never going to be able to compete against $1 billion private equity company to buy a home. These ICE raids, right? They're tearing families apart to put them into for-profit ICE prisons. I think fathers, moms, grandmas, they belong with their children. They belong together with their families, not in a for-profit prison. Or when it comes to the genocide in Palestine, the state of Israel has free healthcare. The state of Israel has free education. We don't have that here. So why are we giving Israel billions of dollars when they are also committing genocide and using our money to bomb children, right? This country has lost its desire, or it has lost the path when it comes to building a country that works for working people, for regular people. And instead, it's whoever can donate to a politician, that whoever donates gets a slice of taxpayer money. The more you donate, the bigger slice you get. And that's why life has gotten so much harder for working people of all colors in our country. And I think we need to understand that, because Democrats often say Trump is winning, especially among working class voters of all colors, because those voters are not educated. And that's not right. That's completely wrong. I think there are so many working class people who are the majority of this country, by the way. But working people in this country have seen that the economy and our government does not work for them for the past 50 years. Their wages have not increased compared to prices. And they're looking for change. They know this current system is not working. And the Democrats represent the current system. And they're funded by billions of dollars from these corporations. Whereas the Trump, rightly or wrongly, is promising transformative change. And that's what makes him so attractive to working people who don't see a future under this current system. Now, of course, there are special issues for AAPI folks. I think when it comes to Chinese folks in particular, a really big issue we need to be concerned about is our civil rights. Because if there's Democrats and Republicans, they do not agree on anything. The only thing they agree on is that China is our enemy. And by extension, then, what does that make Chinese Americans? It makes us look like spies. It makes us look like the enemy. And I think this country will one day soon and try to answer the question, what do we do with the millions of Chinese Americans in this country? Do we treat them like we treated Japanese Americans in World War II? And for our community, what's really important is getting our folks into power and building coalitions, right? Right now with these ICE raids and these for-profit prisons, they are not mainly targeting Chinese people. They're mainly targeting Latinos. But one day it will be us who is being considered to be put into these for-profit prisons the way Japanese people were. And so if we don't speak up now against what is happening, then no one's going to be there to speak up for us when it is our turn.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, as a young person on the East Coast of the country, there's a lot of advocacy organizations out there, but the young people aren't getting involved. And that's why sort of on this platform, we like to highlight young people to take over that sort of passing on of the torch. And like you mentioned, getting AAPI or getting other minority communities into elected office, right, into the decision-making spaces is very important. But we see a huge disparity in AAPI citizens or in, you know, Latino citizens and the number of AAPI or Latino and or other ethnicities elected officials that we actually see in office. And so when you look at that disparity, as someone running statewide, what do you think are those barriers that are preventing or discouraging immigrant, you know, students, young people who are looking to run for office to not run for office? And how can we sort of encourage and to build a system that motivates and shows the need for these AAPI young folks or other marginalized communities or, you know, minority communities to actually run for office, whether that be in Congress or in state office or even local office?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a difficult question. I think how society views us is a factor, right? Asian people are typically not seen as leaders. We're seen as very good at math and very obedient and not really supposed to be leaders. And I think overcoming that, and I think it is being overcome, this perception, but overcoming that is really important. You know, I founded a nonprofit organization that trains Asian youth to fight for racial justice. And over the years, we've trained hundreds of young Asian youth to advocate and to be good storytellers and to be good leaders in their communities. And I always thought, hey, like this is very trailblazing and we're doing really important work. But now that I'm running, what I've seen is the path for an AAPI candidate, such as myself, is indeed very wide, and it is very well paved by the people who came before, the organizations, the elected officials who have spent decades paving that path for us, right? Some of my main supporters are the Asian American community, and they are organized and they are passionate. They know why they're doing this and they know what to do. And I'm insanely grateful for them. So I also don't want to overblow how underrepresented we are. I think, yes, we are underrepresented, but there's been a lot of progress made.
Yeah. Yeah, no, of course. I sort of want to take that pivot and transition into how you being a member of the Asian American community growing up, how has that sort of shaped? How has that identity shaped, you know, how you practice law or why you practice law, how you've shaped your story? You mentioned a lot about telling stories. How has that identity part played any role in shaping why you're running for California's lieutenant governor position?
It definitely has. I'll just share. The first political issue I became passionate about was freedom for Palestine. And that was because it was in 2014, I was in high school, and Israel launched a brutal ground invasion of Gaza, killed thousands of civilians. And at that point, I remember thinking, this is the worst thing ever. How can you kill thousands of innocent people? And obviously, what we see today is many times worse than that. But at that time, growing up, I internalized a lot of structural racism and just thought, hey, it's our fault, right? We are not doing well in these fields because we speak them with the accent, or we're different, we're culturally not assimilated, and these things. I think I internalized a lot of that. And when that situation developed in 2014 with Palestine, I saw how much the language that is used for the people in Gaza being slaughtered, how similar that language was to language that they used with immigrants in our country. Right? Things like targeting them based on their skin color, the way that, if someone who's white, something horrible happens to them, then it is seen as horrible. And if it's someone who is of color, then no one really cares. And how the land is always being taken away from communities of color and being given to white people. The same that we see in working class immigrant neighborhoods here, the same that we see in Palestine. And how often, right, people of color are killed by the police here, and there's no accountability. And in fact, sometimes the police will leave a weapon next to the body of the person they killed and say it was they were holding the weapon. And seeing how often that happens in Palestine, seeing those connections really got me activated. And Palestine is obviously still an issue I really care about today. So it's a complicated question that you ask, and I think it's still one that I'm working through, because identity is really complicated, especially how they intersect with other parts of our identity, and it's a question I'm still asking myself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. For sure. As a young person, it's easy, I think, to get so introspective to the point where you sort of miss, you sort of miss it. Speaking of young people, we're often talked about as if we're disengaged. And again, in this time of such political divisiveness, I think cynicism finds its way into the youth communities, into the young people easier than ever. But in reality, I can tell you that a lot of young people across the US are shaping conversations, are organizing online, right? And are paying attention, right, in different ways to the political and policymaking system, and to see how they can get involved. From your perspective, Oliver, what does meaningful engagement from young people sort of look like? And how should candidates and leaders and policymakers be thinking about reaching out and listening to young people beyond just election cycles to foster real civic engagement?
Yeah, I think young people need to make themselves a force to be reckoned with, because the way it works in politics is, if you're not contributing a lot of votes or a lot of money to a candidate, then they're not going to care. They have no incentive to care. And so you have to be something that's so valuable to them that they cannot afford not to listen to you. And I think social media is a very powerful tool. Before I ran for office, I made social media videos on TikTok and Instagram, and that was how I built up my initial base. So I think that's a good option. But really, I can't answer this question of what's the best way for young people to get involved, because there is no best way. It really is up to the specific person and their community. Some people are good storytellers. Some people speak multiple languages. Some people have graphic design experience. Some people have legal training. Everyone is different. Some people have a podcast, right? But everyone is different. And I think the thing that guarantees that you will be effective in making change is having fire in your heart. And that comes from working on the front lines. So that's what I would advise for every young person, is to get that direct experience and see why they should be fighting.
And sort of building off of that, what would your message be? I guess not the best way, but why cynicism isn't the answer for change. And a lot of people think that, being indifferent sends a message, and maybe it does, but is that necessarily the best way to see meaningful change and to gain hope among young people?
Yeah, there is a lot of cynicism, but there is also so much hope. A better society is possible, and it is so much better than what we have now. And things will continue to get worse if we continue down this path. I really think the power that corporate interests have over our society, our economy, and our politics is toxic. It's like a cancer, and it is spreading, and it will continue to spread. And we need to fight back against that, because that cancer, if it is allowed to continue to spread, will destroy our democracy. With, last Elon Musk, right, putting in hundreds of millions of dollars into the last election. We cannot let these oligarchs have so much control over our democracy. It will destroy our economy too, because when wealth is so concentrated at the top, as we saw in the Great Depression, as we saw in the French Revolution, as we saw in the Great Recession, when wealth is that concentrated at the top and there is no middle class, then your economy collapses. There is no middle class to consume whatever your economy produces, and your economy is going to fall apart, and your society will then as well. And so I think, that is a very bleak future, but it does not have to be our future. A future that is so much better is so possible, right? A future, I like to say for California, a future where housing is cheap, where healthcare is free, and where immigrant families are safe. That is a wonderful place to be. And it is so possible for us to do. We just have to fight for it. And when it's organized people power versus organized money power, the organized people power will always win. But we need to get organized.
Yeah, and that message that you just sent reminds me of when I think James Tallarico in Texas mentioned throughout his campaign that the grassroots people effort, no matter what party, no matter what mission, is always a more stable base and foundation to build off of than just money. And so, sort of zooming out a bit, in general, you're running for lieutenant governor. For the young folks listening to our conversation who don't necessarily know or are wondering what the role of lieutenant governor sort of plays in California, can you just give us a quick breakdown of what that looks like and how you would operate within the state?
Yeah. So lieutenant governor is very different than vice president. Here in California, it's a separate office from governor, and it's got separate duties, and it is elected separately. So I am not working with anybody for governor. And so our lieutenant governor has several important duties. The first is the president of the state senate, where they can co-sponsor legislation. And I really want to push for legislation to protect immigrant families. Things like shutting down for-profit ICE prisons, things like holding ICE agents accountable when they break the law, things like funding our rapid response networks that are protecting immigrants all across the state. Mm-hmm. Lieutenant governor is also chairs the state commission on economic development. And in that position, it would be my job to advise our governor and our state legislature on what California's economy needs. I think the number one need is to resolve the housing crisis. Too many people are paying way too much every single month on housing, and we need to bring that down to help young people and working people. And a big way we need to bring that down is to take on these corporate landlords who own hundreds of thousands of single-family homes. And then lastly, our lieutenant governor is on our public university board of regents. So in California, we actually have 3 different systems of public universities, which I'm guessing is more than what you all have on the East Coast. But yeah, we have the University of California, the California State Universities, and then our community colleges. And the lieutenant governor is on the boards of all 3. And so in that position, I really want to fight to make all of our public universities tuition free, starting with our community colleges, because cost should not be a barrier of entry for people in our state. I also want to protect student free speech. I want to make housing more affordable for students, and I want to divest our universities from genocide and apartheid in Palestine, because our tax dollars and our resources are much better used investing in kids here in California instead of bombing kids in the Middle East. So those are some of the big things that I would be able to do as lieutenant governor.
Yeah, it's so different from living here in Maryland. We have a president of the Senate who is elected to serve in the Maryland General Assembly. Going back into the California scope, immigration is one of the most emotionally charged and controversial sort of issues in national politics, particularly in California, right? Being that much of the state is defined by immigration and by diverse groups of community members. And so I know also a few months ago, Gavin Newsom, the governor, signed a bill, right, banning ICE agents from wearing face masks in the community. How, and that's just an example, but how do we respond to the often unjust actions on immigrant communities by ICE? And I know that certain, for example, in Maryland, right, there's sanctuary counties and sanctuary states, but ICE is sort of moving in, trying to, establish holding grounds in unused, unoccupied former prisons, unoccupied warehouses, things like that. How can we sort of respond to these actions taken by ICE, and how can we translate that fear into inspiration for young people to participate and to voice their opinions?
Yeah. For me, I think the key to fighting back is to voice why these ICE raids are happening. And there's two reasons these ICE raids are happening. The first is, as I talked about earlier, our economy does not work for working people in our country. It has not worked for 50 years. And the right is using immigrants as something to blame. They're blaming immigrants for everything wrong with this country. And what the Democrats have failed to do is to point to the real culprit, which is not immigrants, but corporations, right? When it comes to housing, the Republicans made a big deal about immigrants taking up housing, and that's just not true. I think about 1% of homes sold last year were bought by people who are undocumented or underdocumented, less than 1%. Meanwhile, a third of all homes, so about 34, 33%, were bought by investor landlords. So the impact that those corporations have, who, mind you, are not trying to live in these homes, they're just trying to invest, is 30 times greater than undocumented immigrants. But Democrats will refuse to name that because they are getting money, they're getting checks from these corporate landlords. So I think that's one reason that immigrants are being blamed. And that's why, to save immigrant communities, we really have to talk about the real problems of our country, which is corporations having too much influence in our politics, our economy, and our society. The other reason these raids are happening is because it is a money-making business. Every single immigrant who is arrested is taken to one of these ICE centers, and they are all for profit. They are all run by private for-profit prison companies, and they charge taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars for each individual detained inside per year. So it is a hugely profitable business for them. And then these companies, after making billions of dollars from taxpayers, will then donate a percentage of their profits to politicians to keep on expanding these prisons and to arrest more immigrants. And it is for that reason that they are going after people who every reasonable mind will agree should be kept with their families. One person that I got to work with, he's lived in the US for 20 years, never committed a crime, always worked as a farm worker. He has 4 US citizen children, young US citizen children. And I think everyone would agree that he should be at home with his kids, bringing up his kids. Instead, he was picked up by ICE because of his skin color, and now he's in one of these for-profit prisons. And now we are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep him in this prison, and we are now also paying to raise his 4 daughters who don't have their dad anymore. And so it is a horrible, horrible situation. And the reason it is horrible is because a lot of companies are profiting a lot from taxpayers to keep this cruel immigration system going.
Yeah. And thinking now, these plethora of issues is not unique to, I think, just California, but California has been a pinpoint of a lot of these issues, being as diverse and as large, right, and as involved in the overall scheme of national politics as it is as a state. And so as we sort of wind down, you mentioned coalitions, building coalitions earlier. I know that there are so many different cultural, groups, ethnic groups that advocate for inclusive policy, inclusive, civics, large civic nonprofit organizations, but the collaboration between these interculturally aren't necessarily as much as it could be, in my perspective. And being in part of the AAPI community, I could definitely see the AAPI community extending more, olive branches into other ethnic and cultural groups and communities to, again, band together and to fight for what we believe in, for fight for inclusive policymaking and civics and youth participation. So my question to you is, what's your message to why coalition building, explicitly reaching out and joining arms with people who you might see as not part of your, again, block, and why that's important in making progress?
Because I think the ultimate block we need to build to save our country is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-gender, multi-et cetera block of working people that's going to be able to destroy the power that corporate influence have over our politics and our economy, and to deliver a U.S. that works for working people and not for the corporations that corrupt our politicians. And so it is absolutely essential that, as Chinese people, or as AAPI folks, that we be a part of this coalition and make it stronger. Because if we are divided based on race or skin color, then we'll never have the strength to overcome this premier threat. And if we overcome this premier threat, so many of the issues that affect our individual communities, from racism to racial capitalism, so much of that will also be addressed. I think racism in our country is completely tied to capitalism in our country. And if we're able to deal a really strong blow to the form of exploitative capitalism that we have, then that'll do a lot to advance racial justice as well. Now, there are still issues that are very unique to different groups, and I think we should still make space for them, right? Whether it be civil rights for Asian Americans or the very, very unique threat that police pose to Black Americans, the way that ICE is targeting many Latinos. I think different groups face different threats, and I think we should still talk about them. But the number one coalition we need to build is a working class coalition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think building long-term change also reminds me of education and how important education, our curriculums are. I think a lot of curriculums are limited in terms of, history, the history that we teach. I know in Maryland, we've been fighting very steadfastly to promote and to require more AAPI history to be taught in our communities and in our public school system, beyond the Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese internment, right? Those are the two flagship sort of things that we learn as a student from personal experience. And we actually did get a bill passed from the House and during crossover over to the Senate. But from your perspective in California, how is that? What are your thoughts on curriculum inclusivity, and how do we make change from that education aspect?
Yeah, I think studies is so important because we, as people of color in this country, have contributed so much to the fabric of this nation, but it is often not talked about. And that makes us less safe today. I went to high school in California, and my partner went to high school in Alaska. And the amount of education we got about these things was so different, right? To her, people that are taught as activists and organizers in California are framed as terrorists in Alaska. So, for example, John Brown, who led a slave revolt right before the Civil War and was executed for that, right? In California, he's seen as a hero. And in Alaska, he's seen as a terrorist. Malcolm X, who really advocated for racial justice in our country, revolutionary racial justice, is taught as a leader in California and is taught as a terrorist in Alaska. And I think this distinction and teaching the true history of our country is so important to shaping how our young people see our country and see their place within our country.
Yeah. A lot of it begins, I think, with whether we as young people see ourselves in the education system. And so, really for a lot of young people, I would definitely encourage, even just testify at your local school board, right? Providing your own story, giving your own perspective is very, very important. So Oliver, last question, and this is a bit more introspective. Running statewide, obviously, is a very demanding public an often unforgiving sort of endeavor. And so when you think about the long road ahead, however many months are left, both this campaign and your broader work of public service, what's the core responsibility that you remind yourself of when the pressure might be ramping up? And at the end of the day, what do you want Californians to feel confident about that you'll always show up for?
Yeah. What's always been really important to me is doing right by my values, and running this race with integrity. And what that means for me is if there is an issue that 90% of people do not agree with, it is vastly unpopular, but for me, it is the right thing to do, then I will stand by my values, right? So, and I think that's the kind of elected official we need. We don't need more career politicians who will conduct public opinion polling on every single issue. And whatever issue has majority support, then that's going to be their stance. Because these are not people who have integrity. These are not people who actually stand for anything. As soon as the public opinion changes, then they change. They will never lead change. They will never lead us towards justice. So what's really important to me is sticking by what I see as justice, keeping my ears open and listening to other people in case my mind changes, of course, but fighting even if it is unpopular, fighting even if there is money and power and threats on the other side, fighting for what I know is right. That's the core value I want to take with me in this campaign.
Yeah. Well, California, you guys heard him. Oliver, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. I know you're running around a lot, and for walking us through your journey. I really appreciate your time, your effort in California, and I hope that our young people are really able to take things away from your experience and from this conversation.
Thanks so much, Mark. These were great questions. Love the podcast, and hope we talk again soon.